Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
I want you to just take a second and picture a fish.
Okay, a fish?
Yeah, but I mean, not just any fish, right? I want you to picture a fish that is so fundamentally vital to human existence that its mere presence in a river literally sparked armed conflicts.
Like actual wars.
Exactly, with actual artillery fire. I'm talking about a fish that is completely woven into the lore of the American Revolution.
Right.
And one that supposedly cost the Confederacy a crucial turning point battle in the Civil War. Plus, it's so deeply ingrained in our political DNA that it actually has its own designated holiday.
It's quite the resume for a fish.
It really is. And, you know, you're probably imagining some massive, ocean leviathan, right?
Or maybe some super rare exotic species that's guarded in a remote bay somewhere.
Exactly. But no, today we are focusing entirely on a seemingly humble, notoriously bony river herring.
The American shad.
Yes, historically known as the poor man's salmon. And we have got a fascinating stack of material to unpack for this deep dive today.
We really do.
We're pulling from historical accounts of the very violently named Shad Wars. We've got detailed ecological profiles from the Chesapeake Bay program.
We're super comprehensive, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also got this beautifully impassioned cultural essay by the writer Chris Justice.
Right. That one is a great read.
It is. So our ultimate mission today is to figure out how this specific fish became an undeniable American icon. Because this fish didn't just passively swim through our water.
No, it actively shaped early American history.
Yeah. It shaped the ecology, the regional culture in ways that are, frankly, hard to believe.
To set the proper stage for this, I think we have to recognize why a single species of fish could even wield that much influence in the first place.
That's a great point.
Because, we live in an era of unparalleled modern convenience.
For sure.
If you want protein today, you just go to the supermarket. Or you open an app on your phone. And a meal literally arrives at your front door.
It takes zero effort.
Right. So it is very easy to forget how completely human survival, early colonial economies, and even warfare were once tethered to the unforgiving seasonal rhythms of the earth.
Like a fish migration.
Exactly. In early America, the survival of entire communities hinged entirely on this one fish's spring migration.
Wow.
When the shad ran, communities thrived. But when the migration was blocked or failed, people faced actual starvation.
And history shows us time and time again that when people are pushed to the brink of starvation,
they go to war.
Yeah, they go to war. But before we get to the literal river wars, we really need to understand the creature itself,
The biology is fascinating.
It really is. We have to grasp the sheer mind-boggling scale of its presence in the waters of early North America. So let's officially meet the poor man's salmon.
So the scientific name for the American shad is Alosa sapidissima.
Wait, didn't the source say that translates to something specific?
Yeah, if you translate that from Latin, it literally means most delicious shad.
Which feels deeply ironic to me.
How so?
Well, just considering it is notoriously packed with hundreds of tiny, frustrating bones, it makes it incredibly difficult to eat by modern standards.
Oh, it definitely seems contradictory. But the flavor of the meat, and particularly the rich roe like the eggs, were so highly prized that people were more than willing to just deal with the bones.
I guess if you're starving, you don't mind picking around a few bones.
Exactly. And biologically speaking, shad are anadromous.
Anadromous, meaning they split their time.
Right. This means they spend the vast majority of their adult lives foraging in the salt water of the ocean. But they are biologically compelled to return to freshwater rivers and streams to spawn and reproduce.
Okay, so it is the exact same life cycle as a salmon, just happening on the East Coast.
Precisely. And the mechanics of this migration are just an absolute marvel of natural engineering. These fish are essentially swimming biological thermometers.
Swimming thermometers, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, because their migration from the ocean into the rivers isn't triggered by an internal calendar or, the length of the daylight.
Like a lot of other animals use.
Right. Instead, it is initiated by an incredibly specific temperature threshold.
I found this detail absolutely fascinating in the Chesapeake Bay program notes. They're out there in the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, and their bodies are just waiting for the water column to hit exactly 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Exactly 40 degrees.
But how do they actually process that? I mean, it isn't like they are checking a weather app.
Well, they are ectothermic, meaning they're cold-blooded.
Right, okay.
So their internal body temperature mirrors their environment perfectly, and they have specialized thermal receptors along their lateral line.
That's the sensory organ running down the side of their body, right?
Yes, exactly. So when the ocean currents and the freshwater outflow from the rivers mix and hit that precise 40-degree mark, it triggers a massive hormonal cascade within the fish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, their endocrine system practically screams at them that winter's breaking. And that initiates this overwhelming biological drive to just swim inland.
And they don't just swim into any random river that happens to be 40 degrees, right?
Oh, no, not at all.
Because the sources mentioned they possess a navigational system that honestly rivals modern GPS. They have a biological clock and an internal magnetic compass that sends them back to their exact natal river.
The place where they were born.
Yeah. So if a shad was born in a specific tributary of the lower Susquehanna River, it will spend 3 to 6 years swimming thousands of miles up and down the Atlantic coast, dodging predators.
Which is a miracle in itself.
Truly. And then, when it is time to spawn, it will navigate all the way back to that exact same stretch of the Susquehanna.
The homing instinct is incredibly strong. It's really hard to overstate.
That's wild.
And when they finally arrive at their destination, the spawning process itself is highly ritualized.
Walk me through that.
Well, the females, which are called roe shad, are generally twice the size of the males.
And the males are known as buck shad, right?
Right. And once they reach the fresh water, they become incredibly selective about the ambiance of their spawning grounds.
The ambience, so they're picky.
Very picky. They want the perfect nursery. The material noted, they seek out shallow gravel or sandy beds in slow-moving water, usually just 4 to 8 feet deep.
Okay.
And they are strictly nocturnal spawners.
Yeah, the thing that really stood out to me from the ecology profile is their extreme sensitivity to moonlight.
Oh, yes. That's a huge factor.
Like, they will actively delay spawning if there is a full moon on a clear night.
It just comes down to basic survival mechanics, you know. In 4 feet of water, a 3-pound fish is highly visible.
Oh, sure. They'd stick out like a sore thumb.
Exactly. The brightness of a full moon exposes them to nocturnal predators. Everything from larger fish to owls and raccoons.
So they just wait for it to get darker.
Right. They require the cover of a new moon or a heavily clouded night to feel secure enough to actually spawn.
That makes a lot of sense.
And when those environmental conditions align perfectly, the water flow, the gravel bed, the darkness, the male and female pair up.
Just the two of them?
Yeah, they swim rapidly in a tight circle, side by side, and engage in what is called broadcast spawning.
Broadcast spawning. Got it.
The female releases her eggs while the male simultaneously releases his seminal fluid, which is known as milt, directly into the water column.
And the numbers are crazy. A single female can release anywhere from 100,000 to 600,000 eggs over several days.
It's massive volume.
And unlike many Pacific salmon species that undergo that rapid physical decay and die immediately after spawning.
Right, the typical salmon run.
Yeah, these shad actually survive the process. They just turn around and endure the grueling commute right back down the river to the ocean.
Assuming they survive the predators waiting for them, of course.
Right. Which brings us to one of the most incredible biological adaptations of the shad.
This part is mind-blowing.
It really is. You have to remember, during the years they spend in the ocean before returning to spawn, they are heavily hunted by marine mammals.
Dolphins specifically.
Right. And this is where the shad reveals what is basically a superpower. Because to survive the ocean, they have evolved what I can only describe as a biological wiretap for cetacean sonar.
A biological wiretap. I like that.
Well, we know that dolphins hunt using echolocation, right? Sending out ultrasonic clicks that bounce off prey in the murky water.
Exactly.
And the shad has literally evolved to hear those exact ultrasonic frequencies.
It is a phenomenal example of an evolutionary arms race. I mean, very few fish can detect ultrasound.
But the shad can.
Yeah, the American shad has a specialized structure in its inner ear called a utricle.
A utricle. So it essentially acts like a submarine operator picking up active sonar pings from a destroyer.
That's a perfect analogy.
The dolphin sends out a click, thinking it is being stealthy, and the tiny river herring's utricle picks up the high-frequency sound wave.
It hears the ping.
Yeah, it hears the ping and instantly initiates an evasive maneuver before the dolphin even knows it's there.
It is highly sophisticated acoustic warfare happening entirely in the heads of these fish, just so they can survive long enough to make it to the rivers.
It's amazing when you look at the totality of the creature, its ability to detect a predator's sonar, its magnetic navigation across thousands of miles.
It's precise thermal triggers.
Yeah, and its lunar sensitivity. You just realize how perfectly adapted the shad is to its environment.
Absolutely. And because of that evolutionary perfection, the historical population numbers were just staggering.
We really have to emphasize the scale because it completely redefines our modern baseline for what a river is supposed to look like.
Oh, without a doubt.
We aren't talking about a few schools of fish darting around. The historical accounts of the spring runs in rivers like the Susquehanna describe a biomass so dense that millions of silver bodies physically push the river water into waves.
Waves that were 3 to 4 feet high.
Just a literal tidal wave of fish surging upstream.
It is an image that is deeply difficult for a modern mind to comprehend. Like, the river wasn't just a body of water anymore.
No, it was a living, boiling artery of protein.
Exactly. And that sheer, overwhelming abundance created a unique psychological phenomenon among the people who encountered it.
Right, which transitions us perfectly into Chris Justice's cultural essay.
Oh, the shaze.
Yes, the shaze, spelled S-H-A-Z-E. It is a portmanteau of shad and glaze.
It's a great term.
It is. Justice describes this hypnotic, euphoric mental state that overtakes anglers when they are completely surrounded by a massive school of fighting shad.
He really paints a picture with it.
He writes about standing in the river for hours, catching dozens of these, quote, nomadic warriors, feeling the heavy lunges and acrobatic jumps on the line until he is practically intoxicated by it.
Yeah, he elevates it to a profound cosmological connection to nature.
He does. So what did you make of that?
Well, Justice is describing a flow state, essentially.
Yao state, yeah.
The angler becomes so immersed in the rhythmic, repetitive action of the run that the boundaries between themselves and the environment begin to blur.
It's almost meditative.
Exactly. And it's heavily tied to the seasonal timing. The arrival of the shad acts as an infallible natural clock.
Because of that 40-degree trigger.
Right. Their run coincides precisely with the blooming of the shad bush, the emergence of daffodils, and the budding of cherry blossoms.
So it marks the definitive end of winter.
The rebirth of the world, basically.
I mean, I love Justice's writing, but I did find myself questioning the romanticism a bit.
Oh.
How so?
Is the shaze truly a profound cosmological connection to the universe? Or is it just a really highly poetic excuse for fishermen to completely zone out for 8 hours on a Saturday?
That's a fair question.
You know, telling your family, I can't possibly do chores today, honey. The cosmos are calling me to stare blankly at the current.
Well, there is undoubtedly a convenient element of escapism in fishing. The repetition of casting and retrieving certainly induces a trance-like state.
For sure.
However, the psychological depth Justice points to has real historical roots. For early Americans, the arrival of the shad wasn't a recreational sport.
Right. It wasn't a weekend hobby.
No, it was salvation. It meant the lean, brutal months of winter rationing were over.
Ah, that makes sense.
The earth was suddenly providing an infinite buffet of fresh protein. So that profound feeling of relief, of communal joy, of being deeply tied to the reliable cycles of the earth that gets passed down culturally.
So it's like an inherited memory.
Exactly. When a modern angler taps into that spring run, even if their survival doesn't depend on the catch anymore, they are echoing an ancient human response to abundance.
That makes a lot of sense. This sheer abundance didn't just mesmerize people, it literally built the foundation of a new nation.
It really did.
Which brings us to the deep entwinement of the American shad with the founding fathers of the United States.
This is where the history gets really tangled.
It does. Because when we look at the historical record, the line between economic reality and patriotic mythology gets incredibly blurry.
Very blurry. But the economic reality itself is stark. The shad was the absolute backbone of early colonial commerce.
I didn't realize how important it was until I read the sources.
Yeah, in fact, salted shad was colonial America's very first major export back to Great Britain and Europe.
Wow.
This was long before tobacco or cotton dominated the economy.
I had no idea it was the very first export. The fish was so incredibly valuable that it practically functioned as currency.
People were trading it like gold.
Literally. The historical records show people using access to shad fisheries to actually pay off their financial debts.
Right.
And my absolute favorite detail, fathers would actually write specific fishing spots and river islands into their wills to pass down to their sons.
Just willing away a spot on the river.
Yeah, that is prime generational real estate.
It was immense wealth generated directly from the river's current. And because of this economic weight, you had high-profile figures deeply invested in the trade.
The founding fathers.
Exactly. Take George Washington. He was not merely a military commander and a president. He was a highly successful commercial shad fisherman.
George Washington, the shad baron.
Basically. He heavily invested in the fishery along the Potomac River. Now, it's important to note, he utilized enslaved labor to harvest and process massive quantities of the fish for profit.
Right, a crucial and dark piece of that history.
Very much so.
Yeah.
But he was deeply involved in the business side of it.
Thomas Jefferson was also a huge fan of the fish, specifically noting how much he loved them broiled.
Broiled shad.
Yep. And Benjamin Franklin practically functioned as a shad lobbyist.
He was obsessed.
He used to drink water directly from the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia.
Which is definitely not recommended today.
Do not do that today. But he was fiercely protective of the shad trade. In 1775, Franklin actually published a piece in the Pennsylvania Gazette titled An Act to Prevent Frauds in the Packing and Preserving of Shad.
And that act really highlights how regulated the industry needed to be at the time.
Because of the preservation methods.
Yes. In the 18th century, the only way to preserve massive quantities of fish for export or winter storage was to heavily salt and pack them in wooden barrels.
Right, no refrigeration.
Exactly. So if the barrels leaked, or if the salt ratio was wrong, the entire catch would rot.
Which destroys the economic value.
Completely. Franklin was furious that people were cutting corners. He was demanding that packers use well-seasoned white oak timber for the barrels to ensure the integrity of the export.
It just shows how critical the fish was to the colonial infrastructure. It was a massive industry.
But, it is important to acknowledge that this deep connection to the shad long predated European colonists.
Oh, absolutely. Native American tribes had organized their lives around this spring migration for centuries.
Way before Washington or Franklin.
Right. The Lenape people strategically established their settlements near what they called shad wallows.
And a wallow in this context is really interesting.
What is it exactly?
It refers to a specific hydrodynamic feature in the river. It is a deep, swirling pool created where a fast-moving tributary empties into the slower main river.
Oh, I see.
That turbulence is exactly the kind of environment the shad seek out to successfully mix and fertilize their eggs and milt.
Because they broadcast spawn?
Exactly. The Lenape understood this biology intimately. They built their lives around these predictable gathering points.
The indigenous folklore surrounding the fish is also incredible. The sources brought up the Micmac tribe and Algonquian people.
Oh, the porcupine story.
Yes. They passed down this elaborate myth to explain why the shad's body is filled with so many tiny, frustrating bones.
All right, the bones we mentioned earlier.
According to their legend, the shad was originally a discontented porcupine that complained too much.
A complaining porcupine.
Yeah, and as punishment, a spirit thrust it into the water and transformed it into a fish, which is why it essentially swims around full of internal quills.
That is just brilliant.
Right. Anyone who has ever tried to eat a whole shad can relate to that analogy on a very personal level.
It is a beautiful example of how humans use narrative to make sense of the physical world around them.
It really is. Which leads us, inevitably, to the most famous narrative of all concerning the American shad.
The ultimate legend.
The Valley Forge miracle. If you grew up learning about the American Revolution, you know the story of the winter at Valley Forge in 1777 and 1778.
It's one of the foundational stories of the country.
George Washington's army of about 12,000 men is encamped. It is freezing, the supply lines are entirely broken, and they are starving.
Famine is imminent.
Right. If this army starves to death, the American Revolution dies in the snow. And then, according to the legend, the early spring shad run of 1778 surges up the Schuylkill River.
The fish just arrive out of nowhere.
Yeah, they essentially offer themselves up to the starving troops. The soldiers gorge themselves on the fresh fish, their strength is miraculously restored, and the savior fish effectively saves the United States of America.
It is a perfect cinematic story of nature siding with the Patriots.
It really is a perfect story.
And as the Pulitzer Prize-winning author John McPhee details in his exhaustive book, The Founding Fish, it is almost certainly entirely fabricated.
I have to admit, reading McPhee's debunking in our sources was a bit heartbreaking.
It does ruin a good story.
It does. But he lays out 3 very specific, highly compelling pieces of evidence against the Valley Forge shad miracle.
Let's walk through them because the way he dismantles the myth is brilliant.
Okay, what's the first piece of evidence?
The first piece of evidence is simply a matter of documentation. George Washington was an incredibly meticulous record keeper.
He wrote everything down.
Yes. During the Valley Forge campaign, he wrote an estimated 30,000 words in his letters, dispatches, and diaries.
30,000 words.
He documented the misery, the weather, the troop movements, and his desperate pleas for supplies.
And Dad.
In all of those 30,000 words, he never once mentions a miraculous run of Schuylkill River shad saving his men.
That is a massive omission. I mean, if an unprecedented tidal wave of fish just saved my entire army from starvation, I would absolutely jot that down.
You'd think it would make the diary.
Dear diary, fish saved the Republic today. Like, it's a big deal.
Exactly. So that's point one. The second piece of evidence relies on climatology, which actually ties directly back to the biology we discussed earlier.
The 40-degree trigger.
You got it. Historical weather records indicate that the spring of 1778 was unusually cold. It was part of a broader cooling period. And remember, shad are absolute slaves to the thermometer. They will not migrate until the water hits 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Because it was such a brutal, lingering winter, the rivers remained frigid well into the spring.
Ah, so the water wasn't warm enough.
Right. The massive schools of shad would have remained huddled in the warmer ocean waters near Cape May, New Jersey, just waiting for the temperature gradient to shift.
They physically wouldn't have been in the river when the army needed them most.
Exactly. Nature doesn't care about the Continental Army's schedule.
The 40-degree trigger betrays the myth. I love that. And then there is the third piece of evidence, which is the physical proof, or rather, the lack of it.
The archaeology.
Right. McPhee brings in the work of taphonomists. For those who aren't familiar, taphonomy is the study of how organisms decay and become fossilized or preserved in the soil over time.
Right. And taphonomists and zooarchaeologists have extensively excavated the soil at the Valley Forge encampment site.
Looking for bones.
Exactly. They analyze the acidity of the dirt and look for any preserved organic material to understand what the soldiers were actually eating.
And what did they find?
Well, they have found the bone remains of many different animals, pigs, cows, local game, but they have found absolutely 0 fish bones.
None at all.
Not a single one.
In an encampment of 12,000 men who supposedly ate barrels and barrels of the most notoriously bony fish on the planet.
Right. If they ate that much shad, there would be evidence.
If the legend were true, the ground would literally be sparkling with tiny fish bones. But the physical evidence just isn't there.
It just doesn't hold up.
So this naturally made me wonder when I was reading it. If the fish weren't there and Washington and the other commanders knew they weren't there, did they intentionally allow this myth to propagate later?
That's a really interesting theory.
Like, was the savior fish a brilliant, deliberate piece of early American PR? Like, hey, look, even the rivers of North America are patriotic.
It is a highly perceptive way to look at it. While we can't prove Washington actively concocted the rumor in a smoke-filled room, we can analyze why human societies fundamentally require these kinds of myths.
Why do they?
Well, a new, fragile nation needs foundational mythology to legitimize its existence. They need to connect their fragile political triumphs to some form of divine or natural providence.
Like it was meant to be.
Exactly. The idea that the river itself rose up to feed the starving patriots implies that the American cause was cosmically endorsed by the land itself.
Wow.
It echoes the myth of Romulus and Remus being raised by a wolf to found Rome. We want our survival to feel preordained.
That makes a lot of sense. So even if the shad didn't physically save the army in 1778, the idea of the shad became an essential building block of the American identity.
It became a symbol.
That myth of peaceful salvation is beautiful. But when you look at the actual history of the shad in places like Pennsylvania during the 18th and 19th centuries, it was the exact opposite of peaceful.
It was incredibly violent.
Brutally violent. Because when a resource is that vital to survival and economic prosperity, people won't just write myths about it. They will fight to the absolute death to control it.
Which brings us to the era appropriately dubbed the Shad Wars.
The Shad Wars. It sounds like a movie.
It reads like one. The historical records outline a period from the early 1700s right up through the Civil War that is characterized by absolute chaos and vigilante justice on the rivers.
To understand the violence, we really have to grasp the sheer scale of the commercial harvest at this time.
It was industrial scale.
Yeah, as America industrialized and the population grew, the demand for this cheap protein skyrocketed. The sources note that between 1831 and 1850, commercial fishermen in the Chesapeake Bay region were catching 41,000 metric tons of shad every single year.
41,000 metric tons. Just to put that into perspective, that is the equivalent weight of an adult humpback whale.
A humpback whale?
Imagine pulling a humpback whale's worth of tiny 3-pound silver fish out of the bay every single spring.
That is absurd.
They accomplished this using massive haul seines. These were enormous nets deployed from boats and dragged onto the beaches by teams of horses or dozens of men pulling in tens of thousands of fish in a single sweep.
And that level of massive, localized extraction creates immediate geographical tension.
Oh, immediately, because the fish are swimming upriver from the ocean.
So if you live near the mouth of the river or in a major commercial hub lower down the river like Columbia, Pennsylvania, and you build these massive nets and traps, you are intercepting the entire migration.
You're taking everything.
Which means the communities living 50 or 100 miles upriver are left staring at empty, fishless water.
You have a classic upstream-downstream resource conflict. Yeah. And the escalation of violence over this disparity was just stunning.
When did it start getting violent?
It begins quite early. In 1731, a man named Stephen Atkinson built a fulling mill dam on the Conestoga Creek.
A fulling mill? What exactly is that?
It was an early industrial facility used to clean and thicken wool cloth using heavy water-powered hammers.
Okay, got it.
So to get the water power for the mill, Atkinson built a dam straight across the creek, entirely blocking the shad run.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
Yeah. The locals upstream were furious. They lost their primary spring food source, so one guy could clean his wool.
That's a rough trade-off.
They petitioned the Pennsylvania Assembly to force him to remove it, but the government was way too slow to act.
So what did they do?
The locals took matters into their own hands. They formed a mob, marched down to the creek in the middle of the night, and completely dismantled the dam by hand.
By hand, just tore it apart.
And when Atkinson rebuilt the dam, the mob returned and destroyed it again.
Wow.
This established a terrifying precedent. It showed that if the government wouldn't protect the river access, vigilante justice absolutely would.
It reads exactly like the Wild West, but instead of cowboys fighting over gold claims or cattle drives, you have organized vigilante groups staging riverboat raids over fish.
Exactly.
The sources detail a group called the Fishing Society of Lancaster County.
Which sounds so polite.
It does. It sounds like a polite club that ties flies and drinks tea, but in the 1770s, they were essentially a paramilitary enforcement squad.
They were not messing around.
They would patrol the rivers and physically tear down illegal weirs. And just to clarify for the listener, a weir is a massive V-shaped funnel made of rocks or wooden stakes built into the riverbed that traps the fish as they swim upstream.
Right. And as the Industrial Revolution progressed, the demand for water power increased, leading to larger, more permanent dams, which only heightened the tensions.
It was a powder keg.
By the 1850s, this regional anger exploded into a conflict known as the Great Safe Harbor Shad War.
This is where it elevates from localized fistfights to actual military engagements, right?
Yes, you had the massive commercial fishing operations in Columbia, Pennsylvania.
Downriver.
Right. They felt their downriver catch was being threatened by an intricate network of fish traps and weirs operating near a town called Safe Harbor.
So what's their solution?
The Columbia men mount a literal naval invasion.
Naval invasion.
They organize a fleet of boats and travel downriver with the explicit goal of destroying the Safe Harbor equipment.
But the Safe Harbor guys were ready for them.
They were entirely prepared for the assault. They met the Columbia invaders on the water, armed with rocks, heavy clubs, and long wooden boat poles that they wielded like spears.
And, incredibly, the historical rumor suggests they also had an actual cannon.
A cannon. Over fish.
Yes. The sources recount that the Safe Harbor men repelled the Columbia fleet under the threat of artillery fire from a Griffin cannon that had been manufactured at the nearby Safe Harbor Ironworks.
That is just wild.
The Safe Harbor guys denied it later, obviously, likely to avoid federal charges, but the fact that artillery fire was a credible threat tells you how intense this was. We are talking about cannon fire over river herring.
And the violence frequently turned lethal, unfortunately.
Yeah, the sources mention a murder.
In 1862, there was a bloody incident on Shad Island in the Susquehanna.
Shad Island.
The islands in the middle of the river were highly contested real estate because they offered the best vantage points for deploying those massive nets.
So people fought over the islands.
Exactly. A group of men from the Turkey Hill area were caught poaching shad on an island actively claimed by men from York County.
Okay, so poachers versus claimants.
Right, and a shootout ensued. The Turkey Hill men fired 4 shots, killing 1 York County man and seriously wounding another.
That's awful.
The shooter was ultimately sentenced to 11 and a half years in Eastern State Penitentiary for second-degree murder.
Murder over poaching fish. It's hard to wrap your head around.
It was absolute chaos.
And the sheer decades-long anarchy mobs tearing down industrial mills, shootouts on river islands, cannon fire, eventually forced the state government to intervene.
They had no choice. The rivers were turning into war zones.
So in 1866, they created what is now the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission to establish law and order.
Right, and they deployed the very first state fish wardens to enforce the law.
But the locals did not respect the badge whatsoever.
Not even a little bit.
There is a hilariously brutal incident from 1880 detailed in the archives.
Oh, the hotel siege.
Yes. The state sends 5 fish wardens to Columbia to break up an illegal fishing operation near one of the dams.
It was a catastrophic failure of law enforcement.
It was a total disaster. The moment the wardens get out on the water, the locals swarm them and intentionally overturn the warden's boat.
Just dump them right in the river.
Right into the freezing current. The wardens have to swim for their lives, and when they finally drag themselves onto the shore, they are immediately greeted by a massive mob.
An angry mob.
Armed with heavy blackjacks, rocks, and empty glass bottles.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
Yeah, it really is. The wardens manage to flee through the streets to their hotel, battered, bruised, and bleeding.
And it doesn't end there.
No, the hotel landlord literally has to barricade the doors and lock the wardens in their rooms just to save their lives.
They were trapped.
They spend the entire night patching up their cracked skulls while the mob outside throws rocks and, quote, serenades them with death threats through the windows.
It is a remarkably dark, cinematic moment in Pennsylvania history.
It really is.
And the historical record dryly notes that following this exact hotel siege, the state decided it might be a prudent idea to issue firearms to the fish wardens.
I would certainly hope so. If I am being hunted by a mob with blackjacks over some river herring, I am absolutely going to demand some serious backup.
You need it.
But what is truly fascinating about the Shad Wars is that it wasn't just mindless violence, you know?
No, it had deeper roots.
It was a desperate, violent reaction by the working class to a rapidly changing world. The small-time fishermen were fighting a losing battle against industrialization.
The dams were getting bigger.
The commercial nets were getting wider, and the common man's access to this vital, historic resource was being choked off by capitalist progress.
It really highlights a massive disparity in society at the time.
How so?
Well, because while working-class men were literally bludgeoning each other with rocks on the riverbanks to secure their winter food supply, the cultural influence of the shad was simultaneously permeating the absolute highest levels of American society.
The duality is crazy.
Over the course of the 19th century, the poor man's salmon transformed into a decadent culinary delicacy and a high society political event.
The culinary elevation of the shad is entirely centered around a cooking technique known as shad planking.
Right, shad planking.
We mentioned earlier that the fish is notoriously packed with tiny, frustrating bones. It is physically impossible to fillet them out with a normal knife.
You'd just be chewing on splinters.
Exactly. But Native American tribes solved this anatomical problem centuries ago.
It's an ingenious method.
The technique relies on the slow application of thermal energy. They would take the whole fish, split it down the middle, and physically nail it to a thick plank of cedar or hickory wood.
Just nail it right to the board.
Yeah, and then they would prop that wooden plank up vertically next to an open, slow-burning hardwood fire.
So it's not directly over the flame.
Right, it's indirect heat. And I looked into the actual chemistry of how this works because it sounded like magic to me.
What did you find out?
Well, the slow, consistent heat radiating from the fire over several hours does something incredible. It slowly renders the rich fat in the fish, while the sustained thermal energy actually breaks down the connective tissues and collagen that hold all those microscopic pin bones rigid.
No.
The tiny bones essentially dissolve, They turn into a gelatinous state that completely blends into the meat.
Making it completely edible.
Entirely edible, while simultaneously infusing it with the smoky flavor of the cedar plank.
It is a brilliant culinary innovation.
It really is. The English colonists adopted it, and by the late 19th century, shad planking had evolved from a survival technique into a massive cultural phenomenon.
It became an event.
Yeah, you didn't just eat planked shad for a quick Tuesday dinner. You hosted elaborate, high society banquets.
The descriptions in the sources are incredibly decadent.
Oh, I have a quote here from the Pittsburgh Dispatch. This is from May of 1889, describing an exclusive planked shad dinner at the famous Tremont Hotel in Columbia.
Let's hear it.
Keep in mind the brutal riots we just talked about. Contrast that with this. Fresh from the Susquehanna, nailed to a smoking pine plank, broiled thereon before a hot fire, brought to the table on the wood on which it was cooked, steaming hot, brown, and crisp on the outer surface, white, juicy, and flaky just underneath and clear through.
It sounds amazing.
Goes on. Served with crisp green lettuce and Saratoga chips. Served in a cool dining room looking out toward the broad bosom of the sun-kissed river, gentle zephyrs playing in and out of the open windows, a pleasant, jolly, brilliant company. There is nothing under the blue skies that can equal it.
Gentle zephyrs.
Right. The contrast in language is remarkable. They are writing poetry about a fish that people were actively murdering each other over just a few miles away.
It's the ultimate luxury dining experience.
And they served it with Saratoga chips, which is just the fancy 19th century term for what we now know as potato chips.
Which were supposedly invented in Saratoga Springs, New York.
Exactly. It sounds like a Michelin-starred dining experience on the Amalfi Coast, and they are literally talking about a bony fish pulled out of the Susquehanna River.
But, the culture surrounding the shad wasn't exclusively about high society indulgence.
No, it wasn't.
It was also deeply woven into the shared grief and the social fabric of the communities that relied on it.
There was a specific tradition mentioned, right?
Yes. The historical records highlight a beautiful, albeit tragic, tradition known as the Widow's Hall.
The Widow's Hall. What was the context for that?
Well, during the Revolutionary War in 1778, Mohawk warriors who were allied with the British attacked a settlement in Pennsylvania's Wyoming Valley.
Okay.
It was a brutal massacre where many local militiamen were killed, leaving behind dozens of widows and fatherless children in a really harsh frontier environment.
That's devastating.
It was. But in the aftermath, a custom emerged among the commercial shad fishermen on the river.
To help them out.
Yes. Every spring, each fishing crew would dedicate the proceeds and the meat of one entire haul of their massive nets directly to the widows and orphans of that massacre.
And a single haul of those massive seines could pull in thousands of fish, right?
Yes, representing a significant amount of money and calories.
It just shows how the fish wasn't just a commodity, it was community care. It was a social safety net constructed entirely out of river herring.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it.
And that tradition of the shad bringing people together for large community events has survived to this day, hasn't it?
It has, particularly in the realm of politics.
Political shad planking.
Yes, modern political shad planking remains a vibrant tradition, most notably in Virginia.
Right, the Wakefield event.
It has become an essential annual rite of passage for aspiring politicians. Every April, candidates, journalists, campaign workers, and locals gather in a field in Wakefield, Virginia.
And they just eat fish and talk politics.
Pretty much. They slow cook thousands of pounds of shad on wooden planks, they drink beer, and the politicians give lighthearted stump speeches to kick off the electoral season.
You literally cannot run a successful gubernatorial campaign in Virginia without paying your respects to the shad. It is a political kingmaker.
It really is.
But speaking of the intersection of the shad and massive political shifts, I have to share the most unbelievable anecdote from all of our sources.
Oh, this is the one from NPR?
Yes, this comes from NPR's Bonnie Wolf, and it details how this exact fish literally caused the loss of a major Civil War battle.
The Battle of Five Forks, April 1st, 1865.
We are at the absolute tail end of the Civil War here. The Confederacy is hemorrhaging troops and hanging on by a thread.
It's the final days.
Right. Confederate General George Pickett, the man famous for the disastrous Pickett's charge at Gettysburg, has strict, explicit orders from General Robert E. Lee to hold a vital rural crossroads known as Five Forks, quote, at all costs.
At all costs.
If the Union Army takes Five Forks, the Confederate supply line to Petersburg falls, and the war is effectively over.
So the strategic stakes could not possibly be higher.
Exactly. So with the fate of the Confederacy resting on his shoulders, what does General Pickett do?
He goes to a fish bake.
He receives a local invitation to a spring shad bake. The spring run is on, the fish are fresh out of the river, and the cedar planks are smoking.
He couldn't resist.
So Pickett, along with his cavalry commander Fitzhugh Lee, literally leaves their troops on the front line and rides off a couple of miles to the rear to enjoy a leisurely lunch of planked shad.
Which is a catastrophic, almost incomprehensible dereliction of military duty.
It is an all-time historical blunder. Because while they are gone, they are away from the front lines for roughly 3 hours enjoying their fish union general. Phil Sheridan launches a massive attack on the crossroads.
Right when they're eating.
Yes. The Confederate troops are completely leaderless. There is mass confusion. The chain of command breaks down, and Sheridan completely routs them.
It was a disaster for the Confederacy.
By the time Pickett and Lee hear the distant gunfire, drop their forks, and ride back to the front, the battle is completely lost. It was a massive, war-ending defeat.
The fall of Five Forks directly severed the supply lines, leading to the immediate evacuation of Petersburg and the Confederate capital of Richmond.
And how long after that did the war end?
Just 8 days after Pickett's shad bake, Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse.
I really want you, the listener, to just ponder the sheer butterfly effect of history here.
It's wild to think about.
Could the entire trajectory of the end of the Civil War, the exact timeline of the collapse of the Confederacy, have been altered simply because two generals were physically incapable of resisting the seasonal culinary allure of planked shad?
If they had just stayed at their posts.
Right. If they had just stayed at their posts and eaten dry hardtack that day, would they have repelled Sheridan? Does the war drag on for another 6 months?
The fact that a bony riverfish played a direct role in the fall of the Confederacy is mind-blowing.
It really is.
But it perfectly illustrates the overarching theme of these sources.
Which is?
Human history, even at its most dramatic and industrialized moments, is constantly at the mercy of natural rhythms.
We're never really in charge.
Exactly. Even when we think we are in absolute control of our destiny, we are still tied to the earth.
Which brings us to a rather sobering reality check, honestly.
The decline.
Yeah. We have spent this entire deep dive discussing how the shad built colonial economies, instigated violent river wars, saved or doomed vast armies, and captivated high society.
They were everywhere.
Right. So the obvious question arises, why aren't our modern rivers still choked with millions of them every spring today?
Where did they all go?
Exact. If they were so abundant that they pushed the water into waves, where did they go? Because sadly, we are entering the era of the decline.
And the sources outline a trifold demise for the shad population.
So it wasn't just one thing.
No, it wasn't one single catastrophic event. It was a deadly combination of historical overfishing, unchecked industrial pollution, and the ultimate insurmountable killer hydroelectric dams.
Let's break those down. The overfishing is just basic math.
Right. Pure math. When you use massive haul seines to pull 41,000 metric tons out of a bay every single year, eventually the reproductive cycle cannot keep up with the extraction.
You're just taking too many out before they can breed.
Precisely. And then pollution was the second blow. As coastal cities like Philadelphia and Baltimore industrialized, the rivers became literal dumping grounds for chemical waste, factory runoff, and raw sewage.
So the water quality just plummeted.
To the point where the juvenile shad simply couldn't survive the journey back to the ocean.
That's heartbreaking. But the dams, the sources were clear that the dams were the absolute death blow.
Because a dam directly interrupts their fundamental biological imperative. A resilient species can sometimes slowly rebound from overfishing, and water quality can eventually be improved over time. But if an anadromous fish cannot physically swim upstream to reach the shallow gravel spawning beds it requires to reproduce,
it's game over.
Yes.
That
species ceases to exist in that river system, period. Is a biological full stop.
I was trying to visualize exactly what this means for the fish, just thinking about the massive 1910 hydroelectric Holtwood Dam or the Conowingo Dam on the Susquehanna.
Those are massive structures.
Imagine a generational migration route, a genetic memory spanning thousands of years, guiding these fish home.
Right.
And suddenly, in the blink of an evolutionary eye, Someone drops a 100-foot-tall, solid concrete wall straight across the river.
It's an impenetrable barrier.
It would be like driving on a massive 8-lane interstate highway during rush hour, and instantaneously, a concrete wall drops across all 8 lanes. The traffic doesn't just slow down, it stops entirely, forever.
The fish just hit a literal wall of concrete.
And the millions of fish trapped below the dam simply failed to reproduce.
And you know what the most tragic part of this decline is?
What's that?
Even when later efforts were made to mitigate the damage by building fish passageways or fish ladders?
Channels designed to help the fish bypass the dams, right?
Yes, exactly. Human spite often completely ruined the effort.
Human spite? Are you serious?
The sources highlight that local fishermen living below the dams, the ones who were furious about having to share the dwindling bounty with the upriver towns, would actively sabotage the state-built fishways.
This level of pettiness is astounding. How did they even sabotage them?
They exploited the biology we discussed earlier. Remember how highly sensitive the shad are to light and movement? Like how they avoid a full moon?
Yes, the lunar sensitivity.
The saboteurs would plant pieces of moving metal or flashing debris in the water right inside the narrow fish passageways.
Oh my God.
The flashing metal reflecting the sunlight would terrify the highly skittish fish, scaring them away from the ladders and forcing them to turn back downstream.
Right into the waiting nets of the locals.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were actively sabotaging the long-term survival of the entire species just to spite their upstream neighbors and secure a quick catch.
That is just endlessly frustrating. And the result of all that concrete, pollution, and human spite is the modern reality we live in today.
The great river boiling runs are entirely gone.
There is a deeply poignant quote in the material from a man named Tim Glatfelter, who owns Mr. Bill's Fresh Seafood in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
I remember that part.
He talks about how back in 1983, he would buy 1,000 pounds of shad at a time for his market, and it would sell out almost instantly.
Because back then, he had customers whose parents and grandparents vividly remembered the great runs.
Right. People bought it purely to taste their own history.
It was driven by powerful nostalgia.
Exactly. But now, Glatfelter says it is genuinely sad because fewer and fewer people are coming in with stories of going down to the river with their families to catch shad.
The memory is fading.
The generation that actively holds the memory of the shays, the generation that remembers the rivers boiling with silver life, is literally fading away. We are collectively forgetting what we lost.
And we really must understand that this isn't merely a cultural or historical loss. It is a massive, ongoing ecological gap.
The food web.
Yes. When you remove millions of adult fish and billions of juvenile fish from a river system, the entire regional food web goes hungry.
Who relied on them?
The sources point out that adult shad were a critical, dense food source for bears emerging from hibernation, for predatory birds like ospreys and bald eagles, and for larger predatory fish like striped bass and bluefish.
It fed everything.
The shads were essentially the great biological conveyor belts, carrying massive amounts of marine nutrients from the ocean deep into the interior forests of the continent.
And when the dams went up, that conveyor belt just snapped.
Exactly. The entire inland ecosystem was starved of that marine energy.
It is a really depressing reality to face. But the sources do offer a distinct glimmer of hope, which I think is crucial to highlight here.
Yes. It's not all doom and gloom.
In recent decades, there has been a massive, coordinated push for ecological restoration.
Right. State agencies, federal programs, and tribal governments have been working incredibly hard.
Breeding millions of fish in hatcheries and restocking the rivers to rebuild the genetic lines.
And many states have placed strict, total moratoriums on commercial harvesting to let the populations breathe.
Which is huge. And those intense conservation policies are actually beginning to yield results, right?
They are. The sources indicate that sport fishing, for shad strictly catch and release, of course, is experiencing a boom.
That's great news.
In river systems where obsolete dams have been physically removed or where modern, highly engineered fish elevators have been successfully installed, the shad are returning with a fury.
So they bounce back.
They are remarkably resilient creatures. If we give them even a small window of opportunity, that ancient biological drive to return home takes over.
Nature will absolutely find a way. If the water hits 40 degrees, they are going to try to push north. When you look back at the sheer scope of what we have covered today, it is honestly staggering.
It's a massive story for a little fish.
We started by looking at a single bony species of river herring. We explored the fascinating mechanics of its biological clock, its thermal triggers, and its desperate push from the ocean to the rivers.
A migration that managed to reliably feed Native American tribes for centuries.
Right. We saw how the immense wealth generated by this fish enriched founding fathers like George Washington, and how the powerful myth of its arrival at Valley Forge became a foundational cornerstone of early American patriotism.
And we watched that same vital resource spark literal cannon fire and vigilante justice in the wild, violent Shad Wars of Pennsylvania.
We saw its cultural elevation into a high society delicacy cooked on smoking cedar planks, and we even watched the irresistible allure of that meal derail Confederate general,
Effectively altering the outcome of the American Civil War.
It is undeniably, just as Chris Justice argued in his essay, an American icon.
It truly is.
It is the ultimate East Coast narrative. The founding fish, the savior of the 13 colonies, and the prized, violently contested jewel of the Schuylkill and the Susquehanna Rivers.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, you noted a final fascinating paradox drawn directly from our sources that completely flips this entire narrative on its head.
Yes, I want to leave you, the listener, with something to truly mull over. We have spent this entire time talking extensively about the tragic decline of the East Coast shad populations.
How they remain a mere fraction of their historic numbers.
Right, blocked by the very industrial dams in progress that built the nation they originally helped feed.
But there's a twist.
A huge twist. In the 1870s, because the fish was so incredibly popular, culturally vital, and economically valuable, humans decided to intervene on a continental scale.
What did they do?
They packed up juvenile American shad, kept them alive in specialized tanks on the newly built transcontinental trains, and intentionally introduced them into the waters of the Pacific West Coast.
They shipped a delicate anadromous fish thousands of miles across the country in the 1870s.
They did. And here's the profound irony of that. While the native East Coast populations struggled against towering concrete walls and toxic industrial pollution for the next century, those introduced shad in the Pacific found vast, open, largely undammed river systems.
Oh, wow. So they just took off.
They exploded in population. So I ask you to ponder this. Today, the ultimate survival story of America's founding fish, the exact species that George Washington harvested, the fish that Benjamin Franklin legislated to protect, the fish that supposedly saved Valley Forge, might actually be playing out thousands of miles away on the West Coast.
That is incredible.
They are thriving, returning in massive silvery numbers in western rivers that the founding fathers never even knew existed.
That is the ultimate pioneer story, enacted entirely by a fish moving west to find open water.
It really is. So next time you cross a bridge over a river in the early spring, just take a second to look down at the current. Think about the hidden evolutionary wars, the dissolved bones on the cedar planks, the artillery fire, and the silver tide waiting patiently in the dark ocean for the temperature to hit exactly 40 degrees. Thanks for diving in with us.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.